Before we get to the campaign, let's talk a little bit about where things stand on Capitol Hill. The House has kind of done its work when it comes to the coronavirus relief package. Um, where do things stand right now, and what's your take on the holdups right now up on Capitol Hill?
Yeah, first of all, I think we have to point out that the House passed the HEROES Act 11 weeks ago, and we had foreseen people running out of their emergency unemployment. We had foreseen the need for state and local funding. And so Mitch McConnell and the Senate Republicans had started negotiating literally days before people's unemployment ran out. And so right now, there's still a lot of daylight between where we are. Democrats wanted $1 trillion for state and local funding, which is incredibly important to our state, one that's been devastated by this pandemic because, quite honestly, our economy, tourism, and retail-based economy relies on people coming out and being in crowds, and it's just not safe to do that. And, under the HEROES Act, Nevada could stand to gain about $8.6 billion. And so there's a lot of daylight on that. I think the Republicans want about $200 billion instead of the $1 trillion. There's a lot of room on education funding. Democrats want $230 billion. There's really nothing in there on the Republican end of things. Mail-in voting and protecting our elections is an important piece of the legislation as well. So I think we have a long ways to go. I'm hoping, the Senate's supposed to recess on Friday, and I hope they can reach a deal before then because our families need that support. I have heard that Republicans are looking at, instead of the $600 per week in additional unemployment, that they'd be willing to do $200 or $400 through the end of September, and eviction protections through the end of December as well.
Just to quickly, you mentioned the mail-in voting. We know it was approved here up at Carson City earlier in the week. The president his campaign is suing Nevada over this now. From a congressional standpoint, is the decision made in Carson City is that part of the negotiation somehow?
No, actually, the state is, we wanted to support funding federally, but the state has passed this bill basically to set it up. And listen, I mean, Nevada, we had 480,000 people vote in June. 98% of them voted by mail. The Secretary of State said there was no fraud in June. There were no recounts. There were no lawsuits. So I think we've demonstrated in Nevada that we can do a mail-in election safely, and I look forward to that happening in November. I mean, ultimately, this is unprecedented. We're in the middle of a pandemic. We want to keep people safe, and to me, this is the way to do it.
I only asked because I thought that's what you had said with regards to mail-in balloting as part of the negotiation, but I appreciate that. And last question about the relief package and the HEROES Act. What is the deadline, I guess? When will sort of the buzzer run out for people who really need the help, whether it's the Republicans' ideas, whether it's what came from the House? Is there a point of no return before we can't get anything done?
Yeah, I mean, and I hope not, because, in our state where 1 in 4 Nevadans are out of work and relying on unemployment, it's critical to our state. So I would hate to say that there is a point where we can't reach a deal. To me, the deadline was on Friday when people's emergency unemployment ran out. We're also looking for basically people have eviction protections that will run out at the end of September. So there's a lot of things. This is an unprecedented pandemic. The economic crisis will only end when the public health crisis ends. We have people on unemployment primarily because we need to keep people safe. And so I guess my main message to everyone is to do our part, wear masks, practice social distancing, hand sanitation, do what we can, because ultimately we all have to work together in order to stop the spread of this virus. And that's ultimately what's going to make people feel safe, so they'll be able to come out and access our businesses.
Let's get to the campaign here. One of the things that has been brought up by your opponent has to do with, and you've addressed this before, the issue of PPP and where the money is going and your husband's company. And again, I know you have addressed this already. But with regards to this new package, what kind of transparency can lawmakers ensure is in place just broadly so that we know where, as taxpayers, the money is going?
Yeah, well, first of all, we set up a commission that will be looking at full transparency. In fact, I've supported and co-sponsored every bill that makes sure we have full transparency of where this money's going, not just the PPP, but the Main Street lending and all the money that we've, put in these packages, the CARES packages. This funding was so incredibly important to our state. We've had over 40,000 businesses representing over 500,000 employees access the PPP program. So I think it's clear that we need to have full transparency, and I have provided that up to this time too.
You're confident that you were transparent enough with the first round of PPP funding, and
Well, listen, my role is really to represent the people of Nevada. And the fact of the matter is that we passed this payroll protection program, and a bureaucrat in Washington decided to use 20-year-old guidance to exclude gaming. And I did my job, which was to represent the biggest industry that employs 1 in 4 employees in the state of Nevada. I represented our district, and I did my job to advocate to make sure that our most important industry did not get excluded from this very important package.
What else does that your district need, aside from obviously the coronavirus and the jobs that have been lost? That's, I think, the biggest elephant in the room. But what are some issues that need to be addressed that you believe you can do and your opponent can't?
Well, first of all, number one, we need to reopen our schools. We need to make sure we have a safe way of opening up our businesses. And to me, where this administration has failed miserably from the get-go was in a national strategy, a national disaster relief strategy. And so to me, that's the most important thing that people need. They need safety. They need to basically feel that they have safety and when they go to school, when they go and frequent our businesses. But also, to me, it's been so incredible that this is a public health crisis. And yet we are seeing that, we have people on unemployment. They're going to start to lose their health care. One of the provisions I fought for in the CARES package was that the federal match for Medicaid funding get increased to 14%. Incredibly important to a state like Nevada that's going to see, it's going to take us a while to get back on our feet and get our unemployment numbers down. I also have been a strong advocate for state and local funding, especially for small municipalities like Henderson and Boulder City, and North Las Vegas isn't in my district, but they were cut out of this original package. And at the same time, on contrast, I'm running against a guy who has been a proponent of repealing the Affordable Care Act. To me, it's incredibly tone deaf that in the middle of this pandemic, this public health crisis, when people need access to health care, my opponent is advocating that we completely repeal any protections for people with pre-existing conditions. So I think that's a clear difference between me and my opponent.
And your opponent would also suggest that the handling by the Trump administration of the pandemic has been reasonably sound. What's unsound about how things have gone?
Well, we have 152,000 Americans who have died, 852 Nevadans, over 50,000 Nevadans who have contracted this virus. The response to this pandemic should have been a national strategy. It should have been a strategy in testing. It should have been a strategy in procurement of what we needed to conduct those tests. And instead, this president basically abdicated all responsibility and basically said, you states go do it yourself. And what that meant is a state like Nevada had to compete with California and New York and Michigan to get the reagents and the supplies to conduct our testing. It clearly resulted in us having a tough time. We're now doing a significant amount of tests, but it took a while for us to get that. And you saw a long turnaround in terms of getting the results for testing. And guess what? Now we're seeing a spike again. We're seeing a delay in getting test results back. I feel that this administration should have come out strong in the very beginning and adopted a nationwide testing strategy and prevention strategy. Even the fact that the president has not worn a mask up until once about 3 weeks ago. I mean, we know that the science is clear. This is an airborne disease, and wearing a mask prevents its transmission. Just some significant leadership of that would have saved thousands of lives in this country.
Final question, and I appreciate the fact that with the pandemic, the idea of debating anyone aside from this manner is hard. Has there been any conversation from your campaign and your opponents of a debate moving forward? We don't have a whole lot of time before the general election here. Any conversations at all about doing something, whether it's in the same room or online, or
I have
do you welcome
I have not had any conversations with the Rodheimer campaign at this point.
Do you care to? Do you have any interest in debating him at all?
Listen, I think that anytime people in Congressional District 3 can learn more about me and my opponent and understand my track record of 25 years in this community of rolling up my sleeves and taking on significant issues and basically coming to Washington with that same drive. And by the way, I've been ranked as one of the most bipartisan members of Congress. I have set out in past legislation that has helped students with student debt, helped reduce prescription drug prices. So I have a clear track record. I think it's good for our constituents to be able to draw that distinction, really against an opponent who has literally a track record of some very disturbing and dangerous behavior.
I would like to ask more about that. I will leave it at that, though, because I frankly don't have time, but I appreciate that. And I'm out of questions.
All right. Thanks, John. Good to talk to you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.